All right. Welcome to OmegaMatters. I'm Kristina. This is Bill, and we're here with Linda Cornish today. She is the president of the Seafood Nutrition Partnership, and we are going to talk about all things fish and seafood. Linda received her MBA from the University of California, Los Angeles, and has had many management and leadership positions throughout her career, but she's also always retained a passion for public health. And she is part of the Seafood Nutrition Partnership. That's a nonprofit organization that inspires a healthier America through balanced diet that includes seafood. And she's launched public health awareness campaigns during Seafood Nutrition Month, which is in October. And most recently, at the start of the pandemic in 2020, they launched the Eat Seafood America campaign so Americans could help be healthier and have a stronger immune system through seafood nutrition. She's been such an amazing person to be connected with and has such a great knowledge about what's going on in this fish and seafood world. And so we are just so excited to talk to you today, Linda. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, thanks, Christina. Thanks,
Yeah,
Bill. Nice to see you.
Likewise.
see you too. So can you first start off telling us about Seafood Nutrition Partnership and history, its goals, what's going on with that?
Yeah. So Seafood Nutrition Partnership is a charitable nonprofit that's been around for almost 10 years, and I'm the president and founder. And so the whole mission for our existence is to help Americans be healthier through eating more seafood for better health, following the dietary guidelines that are recommended by agencies such as the USDA dietary guidelines, the Food and Drug Administration, and other prominent organizations such as American Heart Association. And so we've been doing that through really the help of a lot of our key stakeholders on our board, our Science Council, which Bill is a part of, and our ambassador. So it's taken a village to get this message out to the American public.
Mm-hmm. So something that I end up feeling like is when I give advice to eat more fish, it's always part of what I talk about. I feel like it always ends there of like, here's the science, just go eat more fish. And I feel like Seafood Nutrition Partnership picks up at the really practical part of how do we do this? How do people actually cook the fish? How do you select it? So you actually have like campaigns in grocery stores all over the country, and YouTube videos and Instagram feeds about how to actually cook fish, which I think is so cool. What other kind of interactive and public health facing campaigns are you guys doing right now?
Well, I want to just first just agree with you that our role at S&P is to be that bridge from the science to the consumers. And the studies on the benefits of seafood are so numerous. I mean, both of you have contributed to that, and Bill, to a greater degree. There are 40,000 studies on the health benefits of seafood nutrition for heart health, brain health, and overall wellness since the 1970s. And so I always feel that we're just standing on the shoulders of giants, and that it's our honor to get this information out to the general public. And so that's why we do have a number of consumer outreach to both consumers and also health influencers. And it's just been a great privilege to see the awareness being built about why it's important to include more seafood nutrition into our diets. And I see, Bill, I know you look like you wanted to say a few things too. You've been part of our
Well,
Scientific Nutrition Advisory Council since the start.
right. And it's been great fun. Looking forward to this. I think last year I wasn't able to go, and Tina stepped in to cover for me, which is wonderful. But yeah, I mean, we're very omega-3 focused here at OmegaMatters, right? But seafood is a bigger deal than just it's not just omega-3 in an animal, right? How do you talk about the wider benefits of seafood?
Well, omega-3s definitely matter for our health. It's one of the key nutrients that we do promote. But we do talk about seafood nutrition as a whole. So it's one of the best lean proteins for Americans. And it's also filled with vitamins, minerals, and nutrients, that are essential for our health. So it's the package. I think it's hard to dissect all the different components of a food so that we can take pills from it And so we really do advocate for whole foods and make sure to eat enough omega-3s. We do advocate for people to supplement too with omega-3s as some people may be vegetarians and can't get enough of that seafood protein. There's also, algal sources now, so we
Right.
do talk about the whole food.
Yeah.
Um,
One of the other benefits I think that I would point out is that when you're eating fish, there's other things you're not eating. It's a
correct.
substitution, right? And you're not eating maybe a big steak with a lot of fat and cholesterol when you're eating seafood. So it's not just what's in seafood, it's also what the seafood is replacing is a
Right.
benefit to your health.
Exactly. And I think it's amazing the benefits for seafood nutrition that I think Americans are not aware of. Our brains are made up of fats and mostly omega-3s, DHA, and some EPA, and just our overall body is made up of these like key fatty acids. And so I think Americans, when they hear that, it's like, okay, well, how does it benefit me? And so we break it down into layman's terms, that it's good for our brain, good for our health and overall wellness. And through these studies, moms who eat seafood have had babies that have shown that their IQs are higher than moms who do not eat seafood by almost 7 IQ points. And right
That's
now,
amazing.
especially during the pandemic, Americans are facing a lot of mental health issues more than ever. And so even the, American Psychiatric Association recommends eating fatty fish, because people who eat fatty fish are shown to have like 20% less risk of, anxiety and depression.
Wow.
And so it's really not targeting like, oh, if I eat this, it's just for the brain or it's for the heart. It's just an overall, wellness that we try to share with everybody, and that it's been recommended by prominent organizations. And we're just a vehicle to get this information out to the general public.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's just so important. And especially you talked about the fish and seafood during pregnancy, something I've been focused on as well. And the biggest issues are the fear of fish, especially for pregnant women. And there was, the Mercury FDA advisory essentially like 20 or 30 years ago that is still holding on. And it's a big fear factor for pregnant women that fish contain mercury or other environmental toxins, something I get asked all the time.
Yeah.
And so I was just curious, what do you usually say when people ask you about toxins in fish and things like that?
Well, one, the first thing I tell people about food in general is that the American food system is safe. We have a great system that evaluates and inspects our food. And so, yes, when we see media, we tend to really hear the negative headlines more, but just take a step back. Our food system is safe. We have food inspectors at all points along the supply chain, and also at the retail and food service areas. The seafood buyers are following sustainable practices and also making sure that they're buying safe seafood. And so just step one, that America has a safe food system. And going more specifically on seafood and the FDA recommendations for pregnant women, that advisory came out in 2004 initially. And so the science wasn't as established about the benefits of seafood. So the FDA and the government went very conservative. The advisor uses a 1,000% safety factor. And so we want to make sure that American moms are safe. And so over the years, the FDA has tried its best to put forth that the benefits of eating seafood outweigh the risks. And I think it was in 2016, the FDA net effects report showed that eating fish the benefits outweigh the risk. Still, the message is not getting out enough, and there's always just cause for concern. And so one of the most recent developments that I think we need to get out more is that the FDA has recently updated this year its seafood advisory for pregnant women. And so for the first time in 2022, the year for seafood. You know, the FDA has clearly stated that moms should eat fish to support their baby's brain and their health. They've never had the word brain in there before. And so this was as a result of several listening sessions that Seafood Nutrition Partnership had with the FDA last year, and the Science Council was involved. And, you know, we have an abundance of science and support now. Why? Because the Scientific Nutrition Advisory Council, Bill included, you know, led by Tom Brenna and Dr. Joe Hibbelin, we did a systematic review of all the evidence available on the benefits of moms eating fish during pregnancy. And it was a 18-month effort. We went through first 2,000 studies, culled it down to about 44, and recognized that almost all the studies but two show that it was positive for moms to eat more seafood. And the two studies that, you know, were left out were the null studies. There wasn't a study that was negative. And so as we're gaining more science, we're sharing that back with the FDA so they have more confidence in providing updated guidance for pregnant women. So moms should eat seafood. They only eat about 1.8 ounces per week. The dietary guidelines for moms are supposed to be 8 to 12 ounces per week. And we have an infographic on our website, seafoodnutrition.org, summarizing the FDA's net effects report. I think it's about 180 pages, so we boiled it down to one page for everybody. And
Thank
basically,
you.
I think they went through 56 species that are commercially available. And so we looked at the top 10 species that Americans are eating. And so looking at the benefits of seafood versus when you actually meet the risk of mercury exposure. So for example, salmon, one of the top seafoods we eat, I think it's number 2 right now. You can have up to 800 ounces of salmon per week before reaching mercury risk. And with tuna, I think tuna is one of those that people are asking about. In the report, you can have up to 56 ounces per week before reaching mercury risk. So when we talk about risk, it's all relative. And we can,
when you say mercury risk, what do you mean?
So
That
you know, in
the thousandfold safety factor in there too.
1,000-fold safety factors in there.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think even then it's still very safe.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so that's clearly laid out in the FDA report, but I think there's just not enough resources to get this information out. Consumers, when they hear something, oh, be careful about this. Well, we're kind of a risk, you know, adverse society on certain things, but not on others. Like, be careful to, you know, not overeat on fast food, but guess what? We're still eating it, you know. Be careful about, make sure you drink enough water, but you can also have toxicity drinking too much water. So it's about balance.
Right.
And so we need to understand like what the risk levels are. Quite frankly, I think the Science Council has proven that it is risky not to eat seafood.
Right.
That's
we
the way
don't
to
eat
spin
it.
That's the
Yeah.
way to spin it.
I like that. I like the riskiest amount of fish to eat during pregnancy is 0, is none.
Right.
Yeah, versus 1 to 2, but even higher amounts of fish intake. There are plenty of cultures where they still eat fish every day throughout pregnancy. Often they've better at like preterm birth rates and those kinds of countries. There's not a lot of environmental evidence to show that high fish intake is dangerous for pregnancy. But
I do want to touch on preterm birth. I think that's one of the areas where we need to talk more about moms who have more seafood and omega-3s, DHA. You know, it's been shown in the Cochrane report that you can have a risk reduction of 40% or more by eating enough seafood and omega-3s in your system. And so, you know, that's like one of the costliest health issues for women and pregnant moms and for the baby. They don't have the head start in developing the best brain when you are born earlier. And so I think talking about the benefits for what's, I think, with highest cost issues and consequences for our population, we should talk about that more.
Yeah. And like, it's just crazy how few interventions or solutions there are for preterm birth. it's almost nothing. There are steroid shots, there's bed rest, which is hugely damaging and hard to do. And I think aspirin might be one. I was just looking at what are the things
Wow.
the doctor would recommend. Low dose aspirin, like fish is a food.
Yeah.
So yeah, the research in the preterm birth area for it has just been really, I feel like it's shocking how strong it is. So yeah, we have that, and now it's like the implementation piece, which is always the hardest.
Right.
But I do think that what's actually kind of convenient also is the general public recommendations are pretty similar to the pregnancy recommendations. The Eat Seafood America, if I remember correctly, is trying to get people to eat 2 servings of fish a week.
Yeah, at least. Yeah, the dietary guidelines, want us to eat at least 2 servings of fish per week. That's it. And amazingly, only about 1 in 5 Americans follow that. So we have 80% of Americans that we need to just get a couple of meals of seafood into their diets. And during the pandemic, Americans actually rushed to seafood more. They actually love seafood at restaurants. And when restaurants closed, all of a sudden people had more time at home. It's like they started experimenting more. So that number actually went up to about 30% of Americans eating seafood twice a week. And I think it's coming down a little bit. So the good news is we've opened up people's eyes more to the healthy benefits of seafood and how easy it is to get into our diets. But I love to, answer any of your questions that you get most often as a, public, in public health, dietitian and nutrition. Like, throw any of your questions at me that I can help with or direct you to the right resources.
Well, I've got one. Is what are the top 5 or 6 fish that Americans eat? And I mean, primary reason people in America don't eat fish is they don't like the taste, right? I mean, then how do you deal with that?
Well, I think those who know, I think there are only about 10 species of seafood that Americans eat very much of. And so we're not an adventurous bunch. The top seafood that we eat, number 1 is shrimp, number 2 is salmon, number 3 is tuna. And then it kind of falls from there. So those 3 species make up about 50 to 6% of what we eat. It's also what we are available. So the other remaining 7 species, we've got some Alaska pollock, clams, tilapia,
so mentioning tilapia,
scallops.
there are some seafood sources that are not, they're good seafood, but they're not good for omega-3.
Right. But they're good for lean protein.
Right.
So they like shrimp and tilapia might not have the highest sources of omega-3s.
Right. But 2 of the top 3 are good sources of omega-3, which is great.
Right.
So the other thing that I get asked about, which is not directly related to nutrition, so I'm not ever super confident in responding, but it's about sustainability. And basically, they're worried about overfishing and the health of the oceans. And how does fish kind of stack up in as far as compared to like beef or something, and how sustainable it is? That's a very vague term. I don't even know. There's so many aspects to sustainability that I have a hard time coming to a clear answer on that. But if you have any resources on those topics or organizations that you like to point people to, that would be really helpful for me.
Well, so I would say that S&P could not exist without the great sustainable seafood movement that's been happening for the last 20 years. And so, we need to have a sustainable seafood supply for us to create a demand for seafood. So it's definitely been something that has made a lot of progress. And so I guess the first point is seafood is the last wild, commercially available food source for Americans and the world. Most of the foods that we eat are farmed. And so when we talk about sustainability, we are trying to manage a wild resource so that we can have more for future generations. And so that's been managed, I think, much better in the 1980s. It wasn't the same story. And so there's organizations that have been working to make sure we have a more sustainable seafood supply. First of all, the U.S. has a great management with NOAA fisheries. We are one of the global leaders for sustainable seafood. So we manage the oceans very well and the stock in our oceans. We have a 200-mile, economic zone from our coast. And so that is all managed by NOAA Fisheries. In Alaska, sustainability is built into their constitution. And so all fisheries are make sure that they are sustainable. And that, what does sustainable mean?
Yeah.
So in a wild fisheries, you have a stock of fish. And so imagine a large ocean and you have different pools of fish. And there are scientists that can evaluate the healthy levels of the amount of fish that should be in that space in the ocean. And then they can predict, how quickly their newborn, guppy fish can grow and sustain itself. And so, for example, in Alaska, they take the total stock and then determine the allowable catch, which is really just a minute percentage of the fishery stock. Mm-hmm. And then in Alaska, they take even a smaller percentage for actual capture for our dinner tables. And so we're managing a wild resource. And so when we talk about sustainability, it's really trying to manage a wild resource so that we don't take all of it out and leave none for the future. So organizations, like NOAA Fisheries, Alaska has a responsible fisheries management certification that they do. There's Marine Stewardship Council and a few others around the world. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization manages this and has a standard that we all have to meet to be sustainable. And they also monitor the stock around the world for both, wild and aquaculture. Mm-hmm. And so, I think if you look, it's called the United Nations Sophia Report. Every year, it's the state of the world's fisheries and agriculture. And in the last report, I haven't read the recent one, but last year, I think about 65% of the fisheries are fished at sustainable levels. Mm-hmm. So we have about 35% that we need to monitor and make sure that it becomes more sustainable. Mm-hmm. If we manage these resources effectively, we can continue to double our catch, but it really is a onus on all of us to have sustainable fishing practices. Mm-hmm. The other aspect of fishing and the source of seafood is aquaculture, which is farmed seafood. And that makes about 50% of the world's supply of seafood. Wow. So when we talk about aquaculture, it's really the term becomes more responsible seafood. And regenerative, agriculture, using the best animal husbandry that we know of to make sure that the, aquaculture farms, whether it's in oceans or on land, have fish that are grown in water that have enough space for them, mm-hmm. and for the feed for them to make sure that they're getting the best feed. The feed component is actually a very expensive part of aquaculture. I think people think, oh, you can just grow and fish with throwing anything in the water. But it's a complex science, just like feeding humans. It's a very complex science of creating the feed. The component that they're watching for is, are we overfeeding the fish? Because that creates like nutrient density at the bottom of the ocean or the pond or the recirculating aquaculture. And so so we're talking about two aspects. And so I guess to summarize, I know I'm going on into probably a bit more detail than you're interested in. To summarize, sustainability is an important part of the seafood industry. There were some reports that were from some of the foundations that care about this, that 80 to 90% of retailers and food service operators have a sustainable seafood policy in place now. So that's been worked on by a lot of NGOs over the last 10, 20 years. No one talks about this. They just kind of let the negative news sit there. But, everyone, since the 10 years I've been working on this, people are working hard at this. Mm-hmm. It's a journey. We never have a stopping point. It's like, oh, seafood sustainable, we're good, let's go on. It's a journey, and we just have to have a constant monitoring of the valuable resource in our oceans, and also as we grow, aquaculture here in the US and around the world.
That was great. I appreciated that. And also a lot of times people are concerned that, they're eating fish and taking up, adding to the problem. But if you're eating fish, you're actually supporting groups that are
Yes.
want to take care of it. If there's partially, if there's an economic impetus to do so, that really helps it actually happen. And so they have to make sure that they can have seafood to catch every year. So they have to make sure it's a sustainable quota. And
Oh,
so it's like the opposite. It's actually eating fish helps
helps the
sustain.
ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a great point to make, Kristina, because I think in the 80s the ground fish on the West Coast had collapsed. And
Mhm.
so there were some sustainable measurements to make sure we don't catch certain fish, and they actually survived, and recovered. But people forgot about the species out there, the lingcod, the West Coast, rockfish. And without catching it, we don't have the focus on that fishery. The
Mhm.
fishermen don't catch it anymore. We don't monitor it. And we
Mhm.
don't know how it's doing if we don't have an attention on that fishery. And so
Mhm.
you're right. It's like it's the opposite of, if we have an attention to it, we can actually manage it better.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
good point.
Oh, those are really, really helpful answers and just grounded in the broader picture instead of individual anecdotes. I think
Mhm.
that's really, really great. So we probably need to wrap up here. Do we have any final questions? I feel like we covered a lot.
I think we covered a lot. It's been
Yeah.
wonderful. Great.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
thank you so
thank
much.
you. Thank you. Yeah, I guess I'll just leave that. Our website is seafoodnutrition.org. And what we try to tell people is what we eat matters, and omega-3 matters. And it matters for our health and our planet's health. I do at some point, I think, want everyone to know about the climate friendly protein that seafood has. It's also, fish don't need water because they live in water, and it's a less intensive way to, either harvest fish or grow fish. And so it doesn't produce as much of the greenhouse gas emissions as land-based produce produces. And so it's good for our planet and good for jobs. And I just encourage everyone to try and get to that twice a week or more seafood meal a week, and we would be better for it.
Mhm.
Amen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Linda. That was great.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you
right.
very much. Bye bye.